starts to, oh, she's laying down. She's fine.
Hey everybody, this is my longtime friend, Miss Shelley LaJoie. Shelley, thank you so much for jumping on and coming with this interview today and talking a little bit about what you do. So let's dive right in and tell everybody who you are, what location in the country you're in, and what you do for work.
Sure. My name is Shelley LaJoie Carlson, and I live in Saco, Maine, which is the southern part of Maine, on the coast. I am a school counselor. I've been at Noble High School in Northbrook, Maine for 27 years, but I started off as a teacher, so I taught chemistry, physics, anatomy for 12 years and got a master's degree in school counseling. I am also a certified coach with the BAR program, Building Assets, Reducing Risks, and work for the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation in the summer.
I didn't realize that you had gotten that certification. That's pretty cool. Why change into counseling? Why go from teaching to coaching more and being that shoulder to lean on in the schools? What drove you to decide to go that angle?
Well, I also coached 3 sports. I coached cross country, basketball, and track. And in 1998, I lost a student to suicide. And a very prominent student in our school community. I had also been her sister's teacher. So she was on my track team, and her sister I had for 2 years in the classroom. And I think that was a really pivotal moment for me, because we as a school didn't necessarily handle that very well. I think we overindulged in working with kids or giving them all this freedom, but to grieve freely in our building, which turned out to be a nightmare. But I found that all of my athletes just wanted to be with me. Like, they wanted to be in my room. They wanted to process with me. And I felt like I didn't have the skills to do that, even though I did have the skills to do that. And so it sort of prompted me to looking at more of being certified as a counselor. Like, I think originally I'd never envisioned myself, or I don't think my long-term goal was to leave the classroom. And I just wanted to get some skills. So I applied and got accepted into the program. And then as it progressed, I found myself more and more interested in leaving the classroom. So, which is tricky, because when you're a scientist and you then go to counseling, they're completely different, brain functions. I jumped ship when I had the chance.
That's
why.
When we go back to that little piece of grief, in the sports community, I'm sure you've seen, especially with your student athletes too, specifically with your student athletes, but, we can go across with all of our minor league and major league sports as well. We've had a significant loss this year. By losing your season, having that moment of all the hard work, whether it's practice, whether it's, digging in deep and finding those corporate partnerships, group outings, whatever, that's a lot of time and sacrifice that you give, when you think it's a minimum of 40 hours per week and then some, and then all of a sudden in one sentence have your season be canceled. And for some people, only a few days later to then be furloughed and potentially not brought back. From a coping standpoint, what are some suggestions that you may have of where do we even begin to heal? How do we even start that process?
Oh, that's really tricky. Well, I do have to say my husband is a varsity coach at the high school level, and so lost tennis in the spring and lost a summer of soccer, and is still in limbo. They're still in limbo whether to start soccer at all at the high school level here. So I think the first thing is to identify your own emotions. Like, I think grief, whether it's the loss of a season, whether it's the loss of a job, or the loss of a person, a pet, grief it's the same. But I think with a job and with a season, it's more of the loss of your hopes and dreams for what is and what was. And though that can be a harder type of grief, I think, sometimes than a person, because it doesn't always feel as tangible, and you don't know. I think people dismiss it and they downplay it a lot. So I think really identifying your feelings about that, and then looking forward to, or finding some ways to reinvent yourself and how you find joy. Because I think a lot of us find meaning and joy through our employment. And sometimes a switch in a job or a loss forces us to look at something different. So kind of reinventing ourselves. But there's no magic answer for grief. There's no magic pill for healing a grieving heart. I think it's just finding gratitude in your everyday life, and maybe every night or before you go to sleep or every day, to say, find 5 things that you're grateful for that day. And that starts to change your mindset a little bit. And then it starts to allow you to look at the positives in the world and look at the positives of around you, so that you're not so mired in the muck that is that grief. And once I think you can get some power behind some positive energy, then you can start thinking about, well, what can my next steps be?
Are there any books that you would suggest that are good, not necessarily specifically with coping, but with just life in general? Are there any that are good reads for you that you feel are really empowering, but also help you as an individual, and you suggest to people to help them to grow and be better versions of themselves?
I think, and I wish I had it in front of me, but one of my favorite books is called The Swiss Cheese of Life, I think it's called. It has a little mouse and some Swiss cheese on the front. And it's about getting caught in those holes of Swiss cheese. And what I like about it is that it's not really a workbook. It's this little book, and it helps you to see things and to kind of put together a toolkit so that you're not stuck in your world, you know. There's also another book called How Full Is Your Bucket? That's always a really good one as well, because it takes a look at, sometimes we overfill ourselves and then don't have that chance to like regroup. We use this book with students, and it's called The Ruby Slippers, and it's by Lisa Ferrens, who deals a lot with trauma. But what I like about this book is that it's not necessarily chapters that you would go through, but it's skill based. So it's like overcoming obstacles. There's a thing on relationship, being present, being the ability to grow and change is another thing that I think is important as we go through life's transformations, I guess. And then I mentioned this to you before, but I really love the work of Simon Sinek. And he does The Power of Why. He does a lot of work on leadership, but I think the power of why and finding your why do we do the things we do? Like, we as a culture in this country identify ourselves by occupation, and other countries don't identify themselves by occupation. And that creates our self-worth. We measure our self-worth based on our occupation. We don't necessarily know why we have that occupation. Like, why did we choose this? What is it about this that is important to us? And what are we willing to let go of? And what are we willing to hold on to? And I think for people who are, you know, experience job loss and having to change when they didn't have to change for 20 years, I think a book like that can be really powerful in helping to identify what's important to you and helping you carve that plan for your next step. So those are my big books that I like a lot. And I like Crucial Conversations too. I don't know who wrote that, but I love Crucial Conversations.
That's a good one if you're a new manager too, and you're trying to have specific conversations with people and you don't know how to have those conversations. You know, if you're a brand new manager, you've never been in a situation like that, and you don't have other managers to go to or to lean to, you're absolutely right. That's a really good book. And you know, you can actually use it in everyday life too, because if there's a situation like maybe you're having a disagreement with your parent, how do you change that conversation? Because you can change your tone and have a completely different conversation.
Yeah.
You could say hi and you could say hi, and they're very different.
Yeah. And I have one more. I'm reading a book right now called The Permission to Feel. And it's written by a man who I think is the founder of the Ruler program. The Ruler program is a program used by schools for social emotional learning. And that's really interesting. It's about our emotions and how, like, when somebody says like how you're doing or how you're feeling, we never really answer that question, and we never share because we don't know. We can't identify what emotion is, and it's actually pretty interesting. I picked it up because it I think I saw it online by Brene Brown, and I'm sort of starting to like her a little bit, so it came up, and I thought it would be really interesting. So
No, I think those are great. And I'll definitely put the links to find those books through Amazon and a couple others, because that's the other thing. It can get really overwhelming and you don't want to type in self-help because people just don't want to type that. Um, how about let's flip over with the people that and look at the people that have kept their jobs. There's a level of what a lot of people would consider survivor's guilt. Why is it that I was kept employed? Why me? Why did I survive, and what is it that I could be doing to help, or should I be helping my fellow teammates that have all lost their jobs? What do I do? And how do they start coping with that?
oh, that's even a harder question.
I'm sorry. We're getting deep this morning.
Wow, because survivor's guilt is real. I mean, that happens with any type of grief. Um, I think it's okay as the quote unquote survivor to reach out to those who, well, first you have to be comfortable in the fact that you are a survivor and be thankful for that. And it's not like egotistical to be thankful for that. It's just like, okay, well, thank you. That's something to be grateful for. Um, and then not if you're reaching out to somebody who maybe didn't maintain their job, to try to just make it about that person and not make it about yourself. I think sometimes we get nervous, we get anxious, and we feel or we project that others are angry with us, or they might make comments that might make us feel like, oh no, I shouldn't talk to them because they've making comments that that I've kept my job and they didn't. And so then it forces us to we get nervous and then we start talking about ourselves. But just going and talking with another person, like maybe you're great colleagues, and having a good conversation or grabbing a coffee, and in a socially distant way, of course, and just listening to them. I don't think that I don't have an answer for the survivor's guilt, really. I think it's just something you have to become at peace with and realize that there's nothing wrong with being that person. And that somebody who may not be in your position, may be in the opposite position, may feel uncomfortable and distance themselves a little bit, but continue to just reach out to the people that are important to you, and let them know that you're there and will help them or listen, and not make things about yourself.
No, and that just comes with being a good person in general
Mm-hmm.
too.
I think a lot of it is just being a good, caring person and empathetic.
Mhm.
Um, and not, again, just take yourself out of the equation. It's not about you, it's about that person, sitting with them and being okay to sit with them in their grief or their frustration and their hardship.
It's one of the beautiful things that I've seen is over the last couple of months is so many different levels of resiliency, whether it's in baseball, whether it's in the school systems and so forth, with trying to figure out the best way to protect our kids, our resources, and so forth. And one of the things that I'm very proud of is the level of resiliency of how so many people are really thinking outside the box. How do I become and still connect with people? How do I make it so that our business can still survive? And I think that spirit luckily hasn't been broken with this, which I think is, again, something really beautiful that you've kind of touched on left and right, by just being a better version of yourself and thinking outside the box, creating your why, and more. So are there any last bits, tidbits of information that you've heard from people on how to move ahead and move on that you would like to share before we end this interview?
I think it's just really important to be gentle with yourself and understand that, like, for I do believe that, like, losing your job, or I think well, let me back up. We are all in this, like, experiencing this collective trauma right now. And I remember seeing early on that there was I think a meme or something, a quote online that said, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boats. And so some people's boats might have really powerful engines and other people might just have to row, or maybe they have one oar or a paddle, or maybe they have no paddles. Like, just understanding that, just being empathetic towards others, being empathetic towards yourself, giving yourself that time to breathe. And self-care, I think, is the most important thing that we could do right now. And I really feel like, as awful as this whole thing has been, I feel like the March and April part was probably the worst. At least it was here for us in May, but it gave us a chance to stop and breathe as people and maybe figure out what's truly important to us. And I think that's the key. I think we're living in a world that's filled with a lot of conflict. And if we cannot have conflict within ourselves and trying to understand that, even though it seems like we're all enduring the same thing, we're not coping with it the same way. And everybody's going to have their own coping skills, whether they're positive or negative. But just finding out what works for you is going to be the most important thing, and staying connected with people and reaching out and having conversations and exploring new things. I think that would be my key.
No, I think that's great. I love the comment about we're all in the same storm, not in the same boat. I think you cannot describe COVID any better than that right now. So, Shelley, thank you so very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And, I'm going to make sure to put Shelley's contact information too. If you have any other specific questions, all of the books that she's talked about will be on my page as well. So thank you again, Shelley. You're a blessing. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you.